Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're going to trace the incredible journey of our everyday food products. We're going all the way from the vast, sprawling expanses of the global farm right down to your local supermarket. And along the way, we're going to uncover this incredibly complex and often totally hidden web of logistics, risks, and sustainability metrics that essentially power the entire food and beverage sector. So, get comfortable and let's jump right in. It sounds like a totally simple question, doesn't it? What exactly makes a supermarket a supermarket? Well, when you walk through those automatic doors, you're actually stepping into the final node of a massive, intricately coordinated global supply chain. To really wrap our heads around this industry and the massive environmental and social footprint it leaves behind, we need to visualize how a product actually makes its way to that shelf. Let's do a quick visualization exercise together. First, I want you to picture the global farm. We're talking about absolutely massive agricultural operations that span different continents, wild climates, and complex regulatory environments. This right here is the origin point for our raw materials. From sprawling, endless fields of fresh produce to large-scale meat production facilities, the sheer scale of the resources used here is staggering. We're talking millions of acres of land, billions of gallons of water, and an immense amount of human labor. Okay, so all of that massive harvest then funnels into the next crucial step, the distribution warehouse. Picture colossal hubs of activity operating 24/7. Goods sourced from all over the planet arrive here in bulk. They're meticulously sorted, stored under incredibly precise temperature controls, and then rapidly loaded into these massive commercial fleets. I mean, these distribution centers are literally the beating heart of the food supply chain, just constantly pumping products outward. And that brings us right back to our familiar, bright supermarket aisle. This is that pristine environment where you and I, the consumers, finally interact with the product. But as we've just seen that perfectly stacked pyramid of apples, or that row of neatly aligned cereal boxes, that represents a massive logistical triumph. But how do we actually define and measure the massive entities responsible for this entire process? Okay, let's dive into this. Under the Sustainable Industry Classification System, or SICS for short, this sector is officially categorized as FB-FR, Food Retailers and Distributors. The standard basically defines these as entities engaged in the wholesale and retail sales of food, beverage, and agricultural products. Now, it's actually really important to note that this specific standard is for pure-play food, retail, and distribution entities. A lot of major retailers out there also have huge pharmacy operations or other multi-line retail departments, right? Well, those actually fall under completely different classification codes. For our focus today, we are zeroing in purely on the food and beverage movers. And wow, the FB-FR sector encompasses an incredible variety of store formats. We're talking about so much more than just your standard mega supermarket. It includes the quick convenience stores on the corner, massive warehouse supermarkets, local liquor stores, bakeries, natural and specialty food stores, and dedicated seafood outlets. And crucially, it also includes the distribution centers themselves. So an entity might specialize in just one of these formats, or it might manage a massive, complex portfolio containing all of them. Now, shifting gears from the physical store formats, we have to look at the actual physical inventory these entities handle. The complexity here doesn't just come from the type of store, it comes from the incredibly wide array of goods that have to be procured, transported, and stored safely. Just consider the sheer scope of this global sourcing for a second. You've got fresh meat and produce that require incredibly strict temperature controls so they don't spoil. You have prepared and processed foods, baked, frozen, and canned goods, plus both alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages. And it doesn't even stop at food. This classification also includes a wide selection of household goods and personal care products that you'd normally find in these stores. The inventory logistics required to manage this kind of diversity? Honestly, it's mind-boggling. But beyond your standard global sourcing, there is a major dynamic shifting this entire industry right now: the rise of private label products. The standard defines a private label product as a store brand item packaged for sale with a retailer's own brand name, whether the retailer actually manufactured it themselves or contracted someone else to do it. Think about what that means. Food retailers are no longer just middlemen selling other people's products. They're effectively acting as manufacturers. They're taking on direct supply chain risks and holding far greater responsibility for where their products actually come from. So, what does this all mean? With all this insane complexity, we really have to step back and ask, why does defining this vast classification actually matter? Why do organizations like the ISSB and SASB spend so much time rigidly defining what a food retailer even is? Well, because you simply cannot manage or measure what you haven't clearly defined. And in this sector, clearly defining the operational boundaries is the absolute crucial first step to measuring its massive footprint. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the SASB standards actually outline specific sustainability disclosure topics and metrics to measure that footprint. Because these entities operate huge physical locations and enormous vehicle fleets, their environmental and social impacts are profound. Just think about it. A tiny efficiency gained or lost here literally ripples across the entire global economy. Let's take a closer look at some of these very specific operational challenges. The crucial point to remember is that a massive supply chain creates very unique vulnerabilities. First off, fleet fuel management. These companies burn immense amounts of fuel, making them highly exposed to fossil fuel price volatility and new climate regulations. Then there's air emissions from refrigeration. The chemicals used to keep our food cold, like hydrofluorocarbons, they can actually have a global warming potential thousands of times greater than CO2. That is a massive regulatory risk. Food waste management is another huge one. When edible food spoils, it's not just a loss of merchandise, it's a total waste of all the land, water, and labor used to produce it. On the digital front, we have data security. Retailers process millions of electronic payments, making their systems highly vulnerable targets for hackers. And finally, food safety and recalls. Contamination by pathogens can happen at literally any stage, and high-risk safety violations can directly transmit foodborne illnesses. And this brilliantly illustrates that these impacts extend far beyond just the environment. They are deeply, deeply social. Retailers employ a massive number of hourly workers, which makes labor-related risks incredibly high. Tracking things like average hourly wages and the percentage of the workforce covered by collective bargaining agreements is vital to understanding a company's operational stability. Furthermore, retailers are increasingly being held accountable for the practices of their own suppliers. Standards actually look at revenue from products certified to environmental or social benchmarks. For instance, tracking the percentage of revenue from cage-free eggs or pork produced without the use of restrictive gestation crates. At the end of the day, consumers care about animal welfare and fair labor practices, and retailers absolutely have to adapt. But wait, how do we make sense of all this data? The emissions, the wages, the food waste. We need context, right? How do you compare a small regional grocery chain to a multinational behemoth? Well, you use what SASB calls activity metrics. These metrics quantify the physical scale of the operations. We look at the absolute number of retail locations and distribution centers. We measure the total square meters of space they occupy. We count the exact number of vehicles in their commercial fleet. And we measure the ton kilometers traveled, which is basically exactly how much weight they're moving and how far they're moving it. By using these activity metrics, we can normalize the sustainability data and make true apples-to-apples comparisons across the entire industry. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today. We've traveled from the global farm to the distribution center, right down to the highly specific metrics used to hold these massive entities accountable. So I'm going to leave you with this. Next time you walk down a brightly lit supermarket aisle and pick up a private label item or a fresh piece of produce, ask yourself, what hidden environmental and social footprint are you really holding in your hand? Thank you so much for hanging out with me to explore the fascinating depths of the food retail and distribution industry. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.